Today, we are answering the question, why is Holy Priest OP? Why is Holy Priest the overall more broad healer for top guilds and top progression since Sepulcher of the first ones? We are now 3 raid tiers in a row across 2 different expansions where Holy Priest is the overall strongest pick in the raid. Well, it's not hard to bring the stamina buff in the raid. Holy Priest is kind of squishy, is kind of immobile, they don't have top HPS whenever I look at the rankings, so why? Why would they be brought in the raid so much? Well, our story and our explanation begins in Castelnatria. This was the situation in Castelnatria when you talk about healers in, top guilds progressing in the raid. Yes, the reason why you don't see the icon of Holy Priest in the top 50 guilds of Castelnatria is because there were no Holy Priests in the top 50 guilds of Castelnatria. Up to that point, Holy Priest was still living the image of being a shit spec only played by e-girls healing their tank boyfriend. There was no other reason to bring a Holy Priest in a raid. The only other reason to bring a Holy Priest in the raid, and while you often still see that many Holy Priests whenever you go and look at the popularity of the specs, like for example the raid after Sanctum of Domination, this was the popularity of healers. Oh wow, it looks like Holy Priest is still doing quite well, it's even above Discipline. The answer is no. The answer is that even with those numbers, these were the top logs in Sanctum of Domination, priests were still being chosen as discipline for the guilds to progress, and generally the popularity of a Holy Priest came from this. Basically, when it's actually tough and you actually have to put in effort during progression, you play discipline, and then during farm you go on autopilot playing Holy Priest. That was the general way for priests to play in the raid. When things started changing and trying to move away from this status quo was in Sanctum of Domination, in that patch where Blizzard added this change to Symbol of Hope. A previously shitty and mostly forgotten type of cooldown for priests. Now, this was also given the 60-second cooldown reduction to all of the raid members to one of their defensive abilities, defensives being these. However, there was a problem. With this change, Symbol of Hope still had a 5-minute cooldown. Where things started really changing was in Sepulcher, because in Sepulcher, Blizzard also added this to Holy Priests. The cooldown went from 5 minutes to 3 minutes. So now the amount of usages of this cooldown throughout a 7, 8, 9, 10 minute fight started going from just a couple of times to 3 or even 4 times. So now the amount of payoff you can have, the amount of extra defensive abilities you can use throughout the fight starts to become quite significant. Many guilds, many top guilds realized how significant this was going to be. Just look at Liquid. When Liquid was progressing on bosses, for example Anduin, this was the conclusion they reached when it came to Holy Priests. And the conclusion was stack as many as you possibly can and cycle Symbols of Hope so you can get back defensive cooldowns for all of your raid as much as possible. That was their conclusion. Not only that, but having quadruple priest giving you quadruple symbol still gave you back the original thing that symbol did, which was mana regen. So now you have massive mana paybacks for all of your healers by having quadruple priest. However, let's see if you can notice a pattern. Liquid was one of the top guilds in the world and they were running 4. Then you have, top 40, top 50 guild running 3 priests. You go up to about 100 ranking in the world, and now there is 2 priests being used, and then you go all the way up to rank 130 in the world, and there is 1 Holy Priest being used. The reason for this massive change is because the better your guild, the earlier you fight a boss, what's gonna happen, of course, is that the boss won't be nerfed, so it will do more damage. You also have less gear, so you have less stamina, you have less room to take damage. You also do less damage because you're under-geared, which means the boss lasts for longer. Now, what you benefit by bringing a priest is number 1, the good old, totally not controversial power infusion that can help you do more damage when you're under-geared, and number 2, symbol. Because the bosses last for longer and the raid takes more damage when you're undergeared, Symbol gives more mana back to the healers. So it gives you way more ways to not go out of mana when you're undergeared, and then it gives you cooldown reduction to your defensives, which you can use to stay alive better when you're undergeared. When you take more damage, you do less damage and the boss fights last for longer. That is the massive benefit you get from Symbol the earlier you fight the bosses, and then as you go down in rankings, the boss gets nerfed 1, 2, 3 times, you get more item level, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 more item levels, so the need for all of this, tech from a Holy Priest goes down. So there is less and less need to bring a Holy Priest in the raid. That logic, that discovery began in Sepulcher and continued throughout an expansion. Plenty of things being changed, talents, legendaries, all these changes coming in Dragonflight. It did not actually change why Priest was powerful. We enter Vault of the Incarnates. Once more, the best healer by a long shot in Vault of the Incarnates is Preservation Evoker, and in terms of HPS, Resto Druid and Mysterious Monk are still better than a Holy Priest, yet Holy Priest was still very popular in Vault of the Incarnates. And this tier, again, with the change of tier sets, buffs, nerfs, and whatever, the situation has not changed. Once more, Holy Priest is not necessarily the strongest HPS healer, but it is even more popular than before, than Vault of the Incarnates. Now, this is the current popularity of healers in Aberrus. And that is because of the power that you can have with a Holy Priest, which was previously the reason why Discipline Priests used to be brought in the raid. Previously, the spec that gave you absorb shields, the spec that gave you defensive damage reduction with barrier, it was Discipline. That's what the top guilds used to go for. Even when everyone would be put in Discipline into the C tier or into the D tier because it didn't have much HPS, very powerful overall, the top guilds were still adamant on running a Discipline Priest because of the damage reduction it was bringing. This slot, this spot, this niche has now been taken over clearly by Holy Priest. Now, they are the ones granting you damage reduction. It's not as simple as a Discipline Priest clicking on barrier and you standing inside of a barrier. Now it's a little bit more complicated. Now you have to start timing the usage of your defensives and then using Symbol after so that your defenses are back and you can put them in your raid cooldown sheet, your raid cooldown list, to fit as many defensives as part of your raid cooldowns as possible. That's the current power of a Holy Priest. Not counting, of course, as mentioned, the other power that still exists for priests, which is Power Infusion, which gives you roughly 500,000 to 700,000 damage every time you use it. So throughout a 7-8 minute fight where you can expect at least 3 power infusions, you can always count, when you look at the damage of the healers, about a couple million, roughly, damage more for the Holy Priests because of their power infusion. So they already had a decent enough reason to be brought because of power infusion, but ever since Symbol got its cooldown reduced from 5 to 3 minutes, now that's the real reason, that's the real power pick in choosing a Holy Priest in your raid, in having way more usages of your personal defensive cooldowns throughout an encounter. So that is to answer the question, why are Holy Priests brought so much? It's not hard to find a stamina buff. Shadow Priest is quite meta after all. It's also a problem for Holy Priests to be so squishy, to be so immobile. They have to be babysat on bosses like Sennart when you go up the stairs, or bosses like Razaget to avoid being knocked out of the platform. They have to be babysat on bosses like Magmorax for the knockbacks, so they are very immobile, they're still squishy, but that doesn't matter when you have this kind of power to give to the raid. So that is why at the moment, and it looks like, if we continue in the next tier with the power, the current power of Symbol of Hope being like this, nothing really should change in terms of how many guilds will prioritize running with Holy Priest. So that is why, and here's your answer as to why nowadays Holy Priest is being so highly considered in raid progression, in Mythic raid progression. Hoping I gave you an answer, especially to some of the seeding classes and specs like a Mystere Monk or a Resto Druid that doesn't understand why they're not brought over a Holy Priest even if they can do 20 or 30,000 more HPS than them. That's the reason why. That is currently why Holy Priest is so good. So, hoping I cleared some of you guys' ideas about the healers right now in this season, we are now leaving each other on this Wednesday. We are, of course, starting the goodbyes by thanking all of the Patreon supporters for the contribution and the help to the growth of the channel. You can still support in plenty of other free ways, like liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself, of course, as well as following me on Twitter, as well as following me on my stream on Twitch. So, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, for once I didn't jinx it. I was complaining about getting too hot too early. Luckily, now we have a few days of cold and clouds and rain. Saved.